Hi everybody, I'm Alister, Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. A lot of photography teachers make a big deal out of teaching the rules, and the argument that they always present to you is that at least you need to know the rules before you can break them. The other argument is that it's a faster way to get from knowing very little about photography to knowing something about photography. My argument is that while I understand that rules can help you to produce work that most people would consider better, perhaps faster, I also believe that they rapidly become a crutch or a Zimmer frame or a comfy chair for you to lie back in and actually stop thinking and stop feeling. So in this video, what I want to do is address some of the photographs that I made on my recent trip to Iceland with the Expressive Photography Forum, and show where my gut and my feel was far more dominant than any concept of a rule or a standard aesthetic, as some people would also want to call it. One of the things we often experience in landscapes is the transient nature of the light. Things can come and go, especially when the weather is unsettled. If you are visiting an island in the North Atlantic at any time of the year, the guarantee of blue sky is not guaranteed. And what is more likely to happen is that you get this light that comes and goes, and it's almost like a cat and mouse thing. If you add that or combine it with the fact that you're on a road trip and you might be traveling hundreds of kilometers in a day, being spontaneous and allowing that reaction to something happening in front of you and being very spontaneous and very creative and very impulsive, if you enjoy that sensation, then you don't have a lot of time to think. You don't have a lot of time to plan. Of course, there are many ways of practicing photography, and sitting in one place with the composition that you like in front of you, waiting for the light to develop, is a perfectly good way to do it, and don't let me stop you if that's your preference. However, the images that I'm going to show are all about spontaneity and reacting to a moment rather than sitting in one place and waiting. If I dive into my Lightroom catalog here, again, I'm going to demonstrate my love of the 65:24 panoramic aspect ratio here. I shot a lot of these while I was in Iceland purely because they look sick on the back of the camera, and that makes me feel good. So here's the first photograph here, and I just loved the way the fjord kind of doubles back on itself, and you get this sort of repetition of these two prows, almost like prows of ships ploughing through the fjord there. And there's a little fish farm in the background, which is the backbone of Icelandic economy for the fishermen. If I compare it to this photograph here, which was the first one, we can see that there's a very different feel to this one. So the light, when I first stopped the van, saw this scene here, there was this very, very instantaneous, I love the look of that, it looks cool, and it was just the way the light was catching this mountain in the background, juxtaposing with this much darker scene at the background, in the foreground. The light changed quite rapidly and lost its impact. We lost that warm feel, the luminosity of the scene changed. And you can see there's a few little changes in the way I composed it. When you compose things spontaneously, you don't think about the rule of thirds. You don't think about where things are in the frame. Now, if I was to superimpose a grid all over this scene, Lightroom conveniently does give you a rule of thirds grid, and you will see here that the line of this horizon here is well below the rule of thirds, and if you considered this to be the point of the frame that was so important, you can see that I could align the scene differently. However, my gut told me that this is the way I wanted to compose it, and you can see here that I'm quite deliberate with where, even though I'm composing in camera through the viewfinder, no tripod, handheld, that I'm just positioning it where it feels right. I'm not thinking about that the line of the horizon has to be there and the intersection of the foreground and background need to be on a power line. Talking of power lines, there were some in the scene, which might help you understand why I shoot panos so often. It's very easy to eliminate problems when you shoot in a panoramic aspect ratio, or even 16:9 for that matter. So feel is a super important way to compose scenes. And if you do it subconsciously and just freely, whilst taking a certain amount of deliberate care on where the content meets the frame edge, because the frame is king, the aspect ratio, the way the content interacts with the frame is absolutely the point of composition. It's what is in and what is out is the important thing. It's where the content sits in the frame, how the scene gets to present itself and perform. You can see as soon as I start moving things around, I'm either going to crop the top of that, and you can see that on this particular aspect ratio that I'm a little bit limited with how the content is going to go into the frame. Now, the area I'm looking at most in here now is down in here, and you can see there's a little dog leg of the fjord there. So now I have a chance to recrop, because I didn't crop in camera. I composed in camera using a specific aspect ratio. But I can recrop here, and I now have a scene that is probably a little bit more refined than it was in camera, but it's also changed its feel, because by opening up this top area, I'm giving the scene more air. Now, this is where feel, again, is a far, far more important way of composing than any rule or guideline. I've never seen any conversation of rule of thirds discussing why it feels a specific way. It's all about, that's the template, stick it on there and forget about it. Don't think, just do. Whereas I would say when it comes to composition, don't think, just feel. And I think feel is always going to deliver a more honest representation, because if you think too hard about composition, you're always going to compose in the way that you think is right. And the way that you think is right has probably been drummed into your head over however long you've been holding a camera. If you think about the ground and the land and mountains as being terrestrial, strong, solid, and you think about air and atmosphere as being light and airy, as soon as I include more of the sky, the feel of the image changes. It opens up. It feels just generally more light and airy. So it becomes less tense. If I go back to my initial crop and go to original and then go to as shot, so that's the way I composed it in camera, there's a little bit less of the sky in this frame, a little bit more on the bottom, and what that's done is it makes it feel a little bit more compressed. As soon as I move up that a tiny touch, we have an image that feels a little bit more open, a little bit less compressed. Now, these are unprocessed raw files, so they do look a little bit flat, but this isn't a video about processing or how to present your work. This is about aspect ratios and, of course, the compositional side of things in terms of how to put the content in the frame. This image now feels incredibly flat in comparison, and it also feels quite compressed. This one is zoomed in a little bit more as well, so I am cropping on the top and the bottom. If we use another example here, this was a scene that caught my eye immediately. I just loved this snaking, curved, sensual line that kind of makes its way diagonally across the frame. I loved the distribution of space. It's almost mirroring with the water and the land somehow fitting like a jigsaw puzzle, and I really, really liked that. But again, if we look at where the crop is, you can instantly see, if I go to the original full frame, that there is a fjord in the background. Now, I can see that there are various ways that this image could be composed. The first version that I shot there eliminated the horizon and isolated the more abstract relationship just between the land and the sea. But in the full frame version, you can see that there's a whole bunch of atmosphere up here that might actually make quite interesting content. Another little thing that's worth mentioning here is that this line isn't a horizontal horizon. Because it's a fjord and that coastline is actually receding away from us, it actually does create a diagonal, which kind of looks a little bit out of balance. If I chose to straighten that, it will make the thing feel a little bit less chaotic, I suppose. So I'm looking at this now and I can see that I might be encouraged to look at this as perhaps a 2:1 aspect ratio, which I think, and again, I'm not thinking too much about that. I just wanted to get the content in the frame there. It's less abstract because by not just showing the curved line between the land and the water, we're starting to show this very atmospheric, distant background. What this has done is provided more context for the scene. But again, what I want to do is concentrate on this idea of feel. If I drop this down just to comply with the rule of thirds, you can see that I'm actually introducing some content down at the bottom here, this area in particular, that I don't really want, and also the way that the coastline there drops into the edge of the frame. I don't really want that there. So I've made videos about the rule of thirds before, and I think it's just worth mentioning again that the rule of thirds and feel are very much two sides of a very different coin. The rule of thirds side of the coin is always going to be formulaic and repetitive and very much driven by indoctrination, whereas feel is your opportunity to put your personal take on the landscape and to compose things in a way that feel right to you, just the same as when you pick up a guitar. Yes, you can play a bunch of chords that are in a load of other songs, but as soon as you start playing melodies or changing the way the notes are organized, you have an opportunity to be a little bit more individualistic. There are numerous ways to crop this scene based on feel. If I was to go back to the original, I would say that I very much composed the scene that I probably prefer the most. I just like it this way. It's very, very tidy. I have included that area at the bottom of the frame there, and there may be a little bit of warping or cloning necessary to try and tidy that up a little, but based on feel, totally happy with it. One final scene here, and again, forgiveness for the sensor spots all over it. It was dusty in Iceland and my sensor did suffer. But again, this is another example of looking at the full frame scene and realizing that there's content in there that perhaps I didn't want. Now, I want to use this image to discuss the role of highlights in composition and the role of transitions in composition as well. Now, all of those things are very much feel-based. I've decided that I don't want to include the foreground at all. I think it just introduces too many variables that aren't going to help complement the scene. So what I think I may do is start at something like a 16:9 and look at the way that I can arrange this content so that I get all the stuff that I want and don't have anything that I don't want. Now, when we talk about the feel of composition, it's important to realize that everything within the frame has an impact. I've been talking about the consequences of composition for years now. There's a consequence to everything that you include in the frame. Is the consequence adding or benefiting the composition, or is the consequence that it's actually diminishing the composition or bringing something in that's negative? These are very personal, subjective evaluations, but I think they're very much worth doing. Don't think about it, just do it, and then once you've finished the photograph, then you can reflect upon your decisions and your choices. That way you learn from yourself. If you think your way through every problem that presents itself to you, you are going to be limited with what you can imagine rather than what you can dream about. So I do look at the way the content interacts with the bottom of the frame here, and I think it's a very good illustration of why I chose to compose the scene the way I did in the first place. I want to have a somewhat organized bottom of the frame here, and I just also want to make sure that that is level, because there is literally nothing that I hate more than ignored unlevel horizons. And just because I am out the other side of anal when it comes to center spots, I'm just going to very, very quickly. I find it almost impossible to work an image or to move forward creatively with an image when it's full of center spots. I just find it such a massive distraction that I'll just move those out the way. So 2 things have happened here. We've removed all the terrestrial stuff, which is that earthly component, just as I talked about in the first images of the fjords. So all we're left with here is water. That's all there is. There's water in a liquid form, and then there's water in a more atmospheric, liquidish form, a more gaseous form. But we are still looking at water. So whenever we have water in a frame, it's always going to have a certain feel to it. This water is bright and shiny because the sun's reflecting off it, and this water is a bit more subdued. But as soon as we start to darken this scene, we can see the role of the highlights along the bottom there. And it gives us a far more contrasty scene. And I kind of like that. I do love contrast. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to pull down a linear gradient. My mouse and keyboard is not beautifully positioned to record this video. And then I'm just going to open that up a little, introduce some more of that brightness to the top of the scene there. And at the end of the day, this composition has got nothing to do with any rules. By just showing the sliver of the ocean surface there, this becomes very much a photograph about space and air. You cannot arrive at a composition like this through following a predetermined route. Nowhere is it written that this would be a normal composition, and therefore you're unlikely to find it by following a conventional path. However, if we allow feel to be our driver and our subconscious feel to be more of a driver, you are more likely to surprise yourself. And again, I think surprise is one of the most valuable things that you can ever do as a photographer, is to surprise yourself. So it's very clear, hopefully it's very clear from this video, that how we compose and how we position things within any given frame is going to have a direct impact on how we feel about it and how a potential viewer is going to feel about it. I do know that a lot of landscape photography, particularly in the west of Scotland and in the west of Europe and in any dynamic environment like the North Atlantic and Iceland, for example, where things are turbulent, energetic, and ever-changing, the opportunity to plan and be very, very conscientious about your compositions can be limited. It's a very, very good skill to learn, to be reactive and to be spontaneous and to allow your gut to drive, because, like I said, that is more likely to lead to surprise. And if you can surprise yourself, you're probably going to make yourself happier as a photographer than if you either don't fulfill your hoped for result or you only produce your hoped for result. because ultimately what will happen with that is you'll get 3 or 4 years down the line and realize that you've been shooting the same composition for the last 5 years, and it's just the subject matter that's different, but in actual fact you only ever compose in one way. I'm only saying this because that's exactly the realization I came to in 2016, and realized that I just had one composition and I just repeated it all the time. Hopefully these images that I've been using demonstrate that I have more than one composition, although I probably only have one aspect ratio now. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you enjoy these little rants that I do about things that are close to my heart, and allowing you to free yourself from the confines of predictability and repetitive processing and composing. Follow Expressive Photography because we're different. That's the bottom line here. Thank you very much for watching. As I said, please hit the subscribe button and dive over to our website to check out our learning material, or indeed the forum. So thank you very much, and I look forward to sharing some more of my ranting with you next week. Bye for now.